Still here? Go home before you start smelling like old people. My husband and I were at our son's housewarming celebration. He had become the president of his company. As we were there, our daughter-in-law emerged from upstairs, speaking to us with a tone of arrogance, hurling insults our way. Our son stood up. It looked like he was about to intervene to stop his wife's verbal abuse. But beside me, my husband muttered under his breath, "Should we just bring this house down?" His words caught the daughter-in-law off guard. She let out a mismatched, "Huh?" Little did she know, it wasn't just the house that might come crumbling down. It was her life, too, though she couldn't possibly imagine it at the time. I am Martha, about to turn 64. Married to Damien, we've lived a happy life in this home. Blessed with 2 sons, Chaz, our eldest, and Dennis, our second. They've grown up to have families of their own, each leading respectable lives. All my husband and I want is to spend the rest of our lives in happiness. However, there's one thing that's been worrying us. It was about Chaz's wife, Ela. Since our first meeting, I never got a good impression of her. At 24, Chaz's wife came to introduce herself for marriage. She greeted us at the entrance, but her face lacked any smile. Ela, right?" I asked for confirmation, having never been properly introduced. Her reaction was anger. "What, does Chaz have other women or something?" she snapped. Both Chaz and I were taken aback. "What are you talking about? Of course not." Chaz hurried to clarify to her. "Then why the need to confirm my name?" Her temper flared, and they started to argue right there in the entrance hall. "I'm sorry. It's my fault for saying something unnecessary." I intervened, flustered, trying to stop their fight. Though I thought their young age might be a factor in her lack of common sense, I hoped that in time, as they settled into marriage, this would all become a laughing matter. Eventually, introductions were made, and the family meeting went on. Chaz's in-laws are really pleasant people. They run a small electronics store, and they seem to get along well. Perhaps because they're so fond of Chaz, our first meeting was a bit of a situation, but I choose to see it positively. It just shows how loved Chaz is. After the wedding, Chaz and his wife started living in an apartment close to our house. A few years later, it was Dennis's turn to get married. Dennis and his wife were expecting a baby when they tied the knot. Dennis was a college student at the time, and Celia, his 20-year-old wife, had started working at her family's home after graduating from high school. Honestly, I was at a loss. My husband and I were anxious about what kind of person would come into the family, but at the first greeting, Dennis's wife brought a gift and introduced herself politely at the entrance. I was taken aback. I had thought that Chaz's young wife was just immature, but Dennis's even younger wife was so well-mannered. Though I had my reservations about how their marriage came about, she turned out to be a very lovely and kind person. She visited our home many times before the wedding. Even heavily pregnant, she offered to help out. Of course, we wouldn't let her do any work, but I remember being touched by the gesture. Dennis's wife's family owned a small construction company. Dennis, still in college, dropped out to work there. Then a beautiful baby girl was born to Dennis and his wife. When the child was half a year old, they decided to have a wedding ceremony, though it was a bit late. Of course, Chaz and his wife attended, but Chaz's wife had a sour expression all day. Even though she was family, she just played with her mobile phone and didn't get up from her seat. Both my husband and I wanted to speak to her, but her demeanor screamed, "Do not approach." The wedding ended without a hitch, but the trouble came afterward. Since they had a small child, they decided not to have a reception. So I suggested, why don't we have a small get-together at our place? Dennis and his wife were delighted, and we prepared some snacks and hors d'oeuvres, inviting Chaz and his wife to our home. That's when the incident happened. "It was a beautiful wedding. Celia looked gorgeous," Chaz said. Naturally, his compliment lightened the mood. But it was Chaz's wife who shattered the convivial atmosphere. "What are you talking about? Who looked gorgeous? Are you cheating?" she accused as she lunged at Chaz. We were all stunned by her unilateral outburst, but I quickly intervened. Ela, calm down. Chaz didn't mean it like that. But that was a mistake. Chaz's wife turned her ire towards me, glaring as she shouted, "What kind of parenting results in such a philanderer? Maybe it's your fault." Then she turned on me. "Ela, calm down. Ela, please stop. Enough is enough." With that, the kids and my husband restrained Chaz's wife. I told Dennis's wife to take the baby to safety, and then they left the room. Watching Chaz's wife heaving with excitement, I was certain of one thing. She must hate all of us, or rather everyone associated with Chaz. For better or worse, Chaz is all she sees. We concluded that it was best for Chaz and us to maintain some distance from him and his wife. That was our decision, and that's what we've done, maintaining only minimal contact. After that incident, I suggested to Chaz, maybe it's time to consider divorce. But he told me, "I thought the same, but when I brought it up, Ela burst into tears and apologized." After their apologies to us, my husband and I decided to let them handle their issues on their own. Despite everything, Chaz and his wife celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They didn't have kids, so we rarely saw each other, but we all preferred it to facing trouble. My husband and I thought it best to just let things be. Then one day, Chaz called. His side project, a game development, was taking off, and he decided to go into business full-time. In other words, Chad was going to be a CEO. He was developing an app game and didn't need a big office, so he planned to hire a few employees to work remotely. He needed a conference room and a workspace at home, so he was planning to build a new house equipped with those. My husband and I were thrilled that Chaz could turn his passion into a career and was looking to the future. A few months later, a mansion was completed. The Dennis family and we were invited to a housewarming. It had been years since we last saw Chaz's wife. Yet there she was, all grown up, a full-fledged adult. No way the past would repeat itself, we thought. With that hope, we brought along a celebratory gift to Chaz's house. "Hello, thanks for having us." I rang the doorbell, and Chaz came out to greet us. With that greeting, we were invited inside his home. Chaz welcomed us, saying, "Here's the conference room. This is the workspace, and that's the living area. Everything's secure with locks," guiding me through the house to the living room. "Wow, this is lovely," I remarked, looking around. My husband and the Dennis family followed behind, smiling. The living room was prepared for a meal, but Chaz's wife was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Ela?" I asked. But Chaz avoided discussing her. In the end, we started the meal without her, and both my husband and Dennis handed their housewarming gifts to Chaz. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble," Chaz said, embarrassed yet grateful, accepting the gifts with thanks, following Dennis's assurance that it was for a celebration. Dennis's family had grown by one since that time, the oldest now in elementary school. The youngest is still 2. Both are dazzled by the new home. It was during these happy moments. A noise came from upstairs, followed by the pitter-patter of footsteps and the sound of someone coming down the stairs. "Is that you, Ela?" I called out to Chaz, but Chaz didn't respond. Then, as she walked into the living room, she frowned upon seeing us. "Ela, hello, long time no see. Sorry for intruding," I greeted her. Yet she remained surly, and then she said to us, "You're still here? The old people smell is going to linger. Leave already. The atmosphere, once cordial, turned icy. "Hey, Ela, that's out of line," Chaz scolded his wife. But his wife didn't seem inclined to accept the rebuke. "But it's true. This brand new house is getting tainted because of them. I told you not to invite them. You get that? You're a president now. We don't live in the same world as these old fogies who can't retire or the average Joes who dropped out of college and got married because of pregnancy." Dennis's family and I were lost for words. Even the grandchildren in elementary school were stunned. I made excuses for her, blaming it on youth or her love for Chaz, but I was wrong. She lacked something fundamental as a person: warmth and kindness towards others. She loved not Chaz, but herself the most, and her status as a president's wife was paramount. I was furious. I couldn't stay silent. Right as I was about to retort, my husband, who'd been listening to Chaz and his wife's quarrel, let out a sigh. He's usually so calm and kind-hearted. It was then that he spoke.
Shall we just tear this house down?
At my husband's words, Dennis's family, I, and even Chaz looked at him in shock. No one could believe those words came from him. Amidst this, only Chaz's wife let out an off-key. Huh? Damien, do you even understand what you're saying? She asked.
Of course. This house that I designed and Dennis built might as well not exist.
My husband replied. What? Chaz's wife, petrified.
A house designed by an old man and built by less than ordinary people is unacceptable for the president's wife, Ela. Since we live in different worlds, maybe you should just move out.
He said calmly, which somehow felt more intimidating. Acknowledging that we knew the full story, none of us interfered with the conversation between my husband and Chaz's wife. What do you mean by that? Chaz's wife started to tremble at his words, and with a look of fear, she glared at Chaz. Noticing her stare, Chaz sighed and said to his wife,
It's exactly what it sounds like. This house was designed by my dad, a first-class architect, and it was built by Celia's family's construction company, with Dennis as the foreman. I might have the title of president, but I'm still without significant wealth or fame. I owe it to my family that I could own such a fine house. In fact, it's me, or rather us, who are the most ordinary here. No less than ordinary.
Chaz's wife turned pale upon hearing this. She must not have known. But even if she hadn't heard, didn't she ever wonder? It's impossible for such a magnificent house to be built on Chaz's income and savings alone. My husband didn't charge for the design, and Dennis's family's construction business, run by his wife's parents, probably didn't make much profit. They cooperated, because we were family and couldn't go against Dennis's wife's parents' goodwill. Yet here was Chaz's wife acting all high and mighty because of her husband's status. Who did she think she was? We're less than ordinary? As if in disbelief, Chaz's wife echoed his words. Despair was evident on her face. Indeed, as she mentioned, my husband continued to work beyond retirement because the company wanted him for his experience as a top-class architect. Dennis was being groomed as the next boss at his wife's family's business. He was well treated by both the staff and the long-standing business partners, working hard for the company, though not yet in the president's position.
That's right. In this crowd, I'm at the bottom. A wife so mistaken to disdain others and act superior is even lower than that.
Chaz said, laughing at the sight of his wife, pale and on the verge of tears. Dennis couldn't help but laugh too, though the atmosphere was far from pleasant. Dennis's wife, quick to pick up on the mood, took the grandchildren out to the nearby convenience store. She was truly observant and considerate.
If you understand now, apologize to Dad, Mom, and Dennis.
Chaz stopped laughing and yelled at his wife. What do you mean? Am I really that bad? You always take their side. A husband should naturally stand by his wife. But Chaz's wife, unable to accept the situation, was defiant.
You're right about that, but if the wife is wrong, it's also a husband's role to point it out, right? You are wrong. If you have a complaint, you're welcome to stop being my wife right now.
Seeing Chaz genuinely display his anger must have been a wake-up call. Chaz's wife, picking up on the cue, dramatically changed her tune and knelt down as if on cue. I didn't know. It's because you never told me. She was playing the tragic heroine. And intoxicated with her own act, she turned to my husband and me and uttered a deep apology. I truly apologize for the disrespectful things I said. We watched Chaz's wife without a hint of sympathy, our faces unimpressed. Her overly dramatic apology didn't resonate at all, and it was too late for sorries. I was never going to accept the kind of insecure apologies I'd heard before. Watching Chaz's wife's demeanor, Chaz turned to us and asked,
Dad, Mom, what do you think? Am I being too harsh? Is something wrong?
My husband looked at me as well. He probably realized I too had something to say to her. I let her have it. I just couldn't forgive her earlier comment. No, you're right, Chaz. If a wife insults her family, it's a husband's role to call her out on it, I said. I will reflect and change my attitude going forward. Chaz's wife continued her poor acting. I couldn't help but feel astounded. No, Ela, it's not the first time you've been rude to us, is it? Didn't Chaz tell you each time? No, he must have cautioned you after each word you said. That's... At my words, Chaz's wife clenched her lips, turning pale. I continued. I don't want anyone in our house who mocks my husband and son. It's better for us both to cut ties now. Martha! Her voice was a desperate plea. Married for 15 years? It was the first time she called me Martha. We live in different worlds. I threw her own words back at her. At that, Chaz's wife slumped to the ground, curling up as if her soul had left her body, frozen in place. She must be regretting her actions a bit now. Being told we live in different worlds seems to have hit Chaz's wife hard. It's ironic that she felt so damaged by her own words. I thought this, but Dennis said, Mom, that was really cool. It seemed like a well-deserved boomerang had hit Chaz's wife. Eventually, Chaz decided to divorce her. She had seemed so in love with Chaz. I thought it would be difficult, but she signed the divorce papers easily, after just a few days of arguing. When Chaz suggested, If you want to stay with me, Ela, work and pay your share for this house we got cheaply, she became furious. Apparently, when they married, Chaz had mentioned he wanted his wife to be a homemaker. Misunderstanding that being a homemaker meant living an easy life, Chaz's wife became anxious that she might lose her position someday. Instead of supporting Chaz and growing as a wife, she began to restrain him. Moreover, she avoided having children, claiming it would be too much trouble. It was clear that Chaz's wife loved herself more than Chaz. Her arrogance grew, alongside Chaz's success as a CEO, and this time her high and mighty attitude led to her downfall. I'm sorry, I'll do anything, please forgive me. In the end, Chaz's wife cried and begged. But when Chaz responded, Okay, Ela, work and pay your fair share for this house, despite getting it cheap. Isn't that what sincerity is? She turned red with rage and lashed out. Work? That's not what you promised when we married. This is fraud. Chaz seemed completely exasperated by what he heard. He had realized for a few years that his wife was clinging not to him, but to the lifestyle that allowed her to live without working. He had subtly suggested that she get a job or find a hobby to get out of the house. But then she accused him of having an affair. In recent years, even talking to a woman at work would bring complaints, and this control was starting to affect his job. Mentioning family would sour her mood, and naturally their conversations had dwindled. He regretted letting her have her way for 15 years, but he could only be glad he had realized the truth now. There was still a lot of life ahead. Chaz could restart his life anytime he chose. After getting booted by Chaz, Ela grudgingly went back to her childhood home. Startled by the news, Ela's parents immediately got in touch with Chaz to hear his side of the story. It was then they first got wind of what had happened. Being sensible folks, they didn't take kindly to their daughter's misconduct. Once they learned about the offense to us, they brought Ela along with some sweets to offer as an apology to our doorstep to make things right. There. Apologize, they demanded in front of us. No, it's quite all right. An apology won't undo the divorce. My husband responded. Of course, her parents agreed. We can't ask you to accept a daughter who has shown such disrespect to a wonderful family. We will re-educate her properly. We apologize for any trouble she has caused. We were unaware and are truly sorry, they said with deep apologies. Watching her parents, Ela seemed to squirm in discomfort. Her folks, incensed by her reluctant demeanor, insisted she apologize, practically dragging the words out of her. It felt like a schoolchild being made to say sorry.
But she wasn't a school child. She was an adult woman, divorced and back home. The thought of her elderly parents apologizing for her actions was heart-wrenchingly pitiful. "Please, really, it's fine. Raise your heads," I said, showing concern for Chaz's wife's parents. After the fallout, Ela found herself barred from her parents' home and was obliged to sign a lease for an apartment in the neighborhood. She's working now, paying her own rent. Dennis's wife reportedly saw Ela working at the supermarket. It seemed she was being scolded by a student with a part-time job. Ela, with little work experience to her name, being reprimanded by someone younger, a part-time student no less, might just be the medicine she needed. From now on, under the watchful eyes of her parents, she'll lead a life without causing trouble to others. It's a far cry from the freedom she once knew, but even this restrictive life is a blessing in itself. Ela, who never realized her happiness and looked down on others, until she can appreciate her current situation, a bit of hardship and strictness may be necessary. Since then, my husband and I live a peaceful life in our later years with no worries. Although Chaz being alone is somewhat concerning, the Dennis family is close by. They are brothers who respect each other. In times of need, they'll support one another. Chaz's business seems to be doing well, too. He's gradually increasing his staff and continues to grow. Chaz, doing what he loves, appears more vibrant than before. Without having to be considerate of anyone, we keep in touch with our children. And now they even take us on a trip once a year. What a luxurious daily life we lead, for which I am endlessly grateful. Recognizing the small joys of everyday life makes us feel that life itself is filled with happiness. Both my husband and I are living days we'll look back on as a happy life when it's time to depart.